Hey everyone, this is Owen with Motion Array, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to make an animated background or pattern all inside of After Effects. Alright, let's get started. I'll begin by making a new composition. I'll make it HDTV 1080-2997 and I'll call it Animated Background. And then I'll hit OK. For this project, I'm going to bring in a color reference I found online so that I can just color pick it. Now I'll go up to Layer, New, Shape Layer, and I'm going to add a path to this. Now drawing perfectly straight lines isn't exactly the easiest thing to do in After Effects, so what I've found that I like to do the most is go into Illustrator and use the line tool. And for this case, I want it to be a vertical line, so I'll just draw a vertical line and I'll copy it. Then I'll go back to After Effects and twirl down my path, and then I can just paste it. And that'll give me a perfectly centered and perfectly straight line. Now I'll add a stroke to this path. And I'll grab the color and be this dark blue. And I want that stroke width to be 10, and I'll go from butt cap to round cap. Then I'll change the name of the layer to Tree Trunk. Now I'll go up to Layer, New, Shape Layer, and this time I'll add an ellipse, and I'll add a fill. I'll change the fill to this middle green color here, and then I'll drag that layer down below the tree trunk and call it Leaves, and I'll zoom in here and reposition it. I'm also going to add a shadow to this, so to do that I'm going to just add a group, and I'll throw in this ellipse path and fill into that group, and then I'll duplicate the group and I'll go to my ellipse path and right click on it and go to Convert to Bezier Path. That way I can edit the path so that it doesn't have to be a circle. So I'll grab my Delete Vertex tool and I'll delete this one over here on the left, and then I'll grab my Convert Vertex tool and I'll grab those handles and drag them straight down, and if I hold shift they'll snap to 90 degrees. Then I'll go to the fill of this path and I'll just make it a darker version to create my shadow. I'm going to go back into my tree trunk now and adjust the path a little bit, just because I don't want that trunk to go all the way up to the top there, maybe just halfway. Now, making sure that no layer is selected, I'm going to grab the pen tool and I'm going to draw some extra branches for it. So I need to adjust those settings and the stroke, so I'll make that 10 and I'll change the color to the same dark blue. And I'll twirl that down and go to my stroke and make sure it's set to round cap. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to adjust the position a little bit. Change the name to branch 1. Then I'm going to duplicate that and adjust the next one to just be a little bit different and on the other side. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now I just need to animate this tree. I'll start by grabbing the tree trunk and going to the Add menu and add a Trim Paths. In the Trim Paths options, I will animate my start from 100% to, let's see, go to frame 20, and then I'll change that to 0% so that it grows from bottom to top. Then I'll highlight those keyframes and I'll right click and go to Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And then for that second keyframe, I'll highlight it and go to our script under the influence and change that incoming velocity to 80%. Then I'll just twirl that up and just hit U on the keyboard to just show that keyframe for the trim paths. Now I'll go to my leaves and I'll pull up the position and scale with P and S on the keyboard. And I'll set a scale keyframe over here at frame 20 for 100%. And a keyframe for the position right where it is now. I'm just going to pop over a few frames here, and then I'm going to drag down that whole layer so its position changes down to the bottom of the trunk. It'll just be easier to see this way. And then I can just click and drag that keyframe back to the beginning. I'll bring my playhead over to frame 0 and I'll change the scale to 0. And then I'll do the same thing, easing these keyframes. Moving on to the branches, I'm going to do these with just scale. So I'm going to zoom in. I see that my anchor point is down here, not attached to my layer. So if I grab the pan behind tool or the anchor point tool, I can just click and drag that. And if I hold the command key, it'll snap to points on that layer. I'm also going to do that to the second branch. Then I'll pull up their scale with S on the keyboard. I'll move my playhead over to frame 20 and I'll set a keyframe for that 100% scale. And then I'll go back to frame 0 and change that to 0%. And again, I'll easy ease these and then use under the influence to change the incoming velocity. And so that's what our animation is looking like right now. I just need to offset some of those branches to make sure that they come in at the right time. So if I pull my playhead over, I can see where they probably need to start. So maybe that's where branch 1 starts. And branch 2 just a little bit after that. Yeah, that's looking good. So the first tree is animated. I'm going to end up animating 3 of these trees, but the good thing is I've made this base and I can just duplicate it and then just make small adjustments. So I'll select all these tree layers and I'll go to Layer, Precompose, and I'll call the new composition Tree 1, and then I'll hit OK. So over here in my project panel, I can see that I've made this new composition. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that twice so that I have 3 trees to work with. And so what I'll do now is I'll go in to these duplicated trees and I'll make some slight adjustments to the shape of them just to give them their own unique look so that it's not the same tree repeated over and over, but 3 different ones. And that'll give the pattern a lot more complexity and just a lot more visual interest. When I'm doing this, I'll just be reusing the same keyframes for the most part, and it's really just changing shapes. So I didn't think that there was any need to really go over this in too much detail. So we've got all 3 trees designed and animated. Now I just need to make their animations loop. So to do that, I'm going to select all these layers and I'm going to go to Layer, Precompose. And I'm going to call this, since this is tree 3, I'm going to call it tree 3 animated. Then I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to right click on the layer and go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. Time remapping allows you to keyframe time, so you can make stuff go in reverse or slow it down or whatever. In this case, we're going to let it play out its normal animation, and then we'll just reverse it so that we get a nice loop. So I'll bring my playhead over to frame 30 and I will set a keyframe. By default, time remapping sets a keyframe at the beginning and at the end of a layer, so it plays at a normal pace and forward. I'm going to zoom out of my timeline just a little bit here, and I'm going to highlight these first 2 keyframes and copy them. And then I'm going to bring my playhead over to frame 150 and paste them. Then I will right click and go to Keyframe Assistant, Time Reverse Keyframes. So what that's going to do is it's going to reverse these original 2 keyframes so that it animates out, just like that. Then I just need to go over to the end of this layer and delete this last keyframe. And the final thing I'll do is I'll go over to frame 200 and I'll set one more keyframe where it'll be at 0. So it's going to be 20 frames here at the end of just nothing, but we need that to set up this expression we're about to do. So I'll go over to my time remap and option click on the stopwatch and go to the menu here and go to Property, Loop Out Duration. So now this whole animation of animating in and animating out will loop. So now this tree is ready to go for the background. We just need to repeat this for the 2 other trees. To make this simple, I'm just going to highlight my time remapping property and hit Command C, and that'll copy the expression and the keyframes. Then I'll go over to tree 2 and I'll select all my layers and I'll go to Layer, Precompose, and I'll go tree 2 animated, hit OK, and then I'll make sure that my playhead's at frame 0 and then I'll paste. And you can see all my keyframes are there and the expression is there too. So I'll just repeat that for tree 1. All right, so now I'll go back out to my main comp, the animated background comp, and if I look at it now, I just have my one tree in there, and that's fine. I just need to bring in my other two trees. So I'll drag those into my composition now. So now what I'm going to do is work on setting up one row of this pattern. And so I just need to make sure all these are evenly spaced and they're in a nice order so that there's not two side by side that are the same. I'll go ahead and leave this second tree in the center. And so that's 960 by 540. I'm not going to worry about the Y right now. I'm only going to worry about the X. And so I'm going to just subtract 400 from this and see. And I think that's good spacing because I also have to have something right here in the next row filling up that diagonal space. And so I want to leave enough room for that as well. So I'll be spacing these at 400 pixels in X. So I'll pull up tree 1 and I'll make that, what is that, 160? So that we're going 400 pixels between each one. Then I'll duplicate tree 1 again, drag it up to the top and change its position to 960 plus 400, which would be 1360. And then I'll duplicate tree 3, bring it up to the top and pull up its position, and it will be 1760. And that fills up that first row for me. So if I scrub through the timeline now, you'll see that they all animate in and out at the same time, and that's nice, but we want them to be offset kind of from the center where the center is first, and it sort of creates a chain reaction. And so to do that, all I'm going to do is offset these layers in time. So the center layer, tree 2, will start first, and then I'll offset these by, say, 5 frames each. So I can just click and drag these, and now we'll sort of get that cascading effect out. With that done, I'm going to select all of these trees, and I'm going to go to Layer, Pre-compose, and call this Row 1, and hit OK. Then in my project panel, I'm going to grab all 3 trees again and drag them back into this main comp. And I'm going to create a different row. So to help me for reference, I'm going to move this row 1 composition down because that's where my next row will be. So it'll give me a good reference. So I'll take tree 1 and I'll put it in between these 2 trees here. That way it's not touching one of its own duplicates in the row above or below it. I'll pull up the position with P, and it looks like I actually did get it exactly in between those, which would be 200 pixels to the left of the center. Then I'll grab tree 3 and I'll pull up its position, and I'll just add 200 to that, and that'll get me in the center of that other side. With tree 2, I need to get it over here. So if I pull up my position, it's going to be 360. And then I'm just going to order these the right way. So it's tree 2 is first, tree 1 is second, and then tree 3. So then I will grab my tree 2 and duplicate it and bring it over here. And it looks like that position is going to be 1560. So now I just need to get the ones on the edges over here. So it looks like tree 3 would be the one all the way on the left. And that's going to be 360 minus 400. So barely going to be visible there, but we'll put it there anyway. Then tree 1 is going to go all the way up here. And that's going to be 1560 plus 400. So yeah, it's just going to hang off the edge over there. And I think I just need to drag this tree up here so that they're in visual order. Then I'll select all of these and twirl them up so it's a little easier to see. And I need to offset these now in time. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have these 2 center ones be the ones that start at the beginning, and then I'll offset from there, since there's not one exactly in the X center of the composition. So it's these 2 here that are going to start at the beginning, and then the ones outside of them. And then the ones outside of them will be offset by 5 frames, and then 5 more frames for the ones outside of them. So that's looking pretty good. I just need to pre-compose these now. So I'll go to Layer, Pre-compose, and I'll call this row 2. And then I'll bring row 1 back up to the vertical center of 540. And I'm going to go ahead and make a background. So I'll go to Layer, New, Solid, and I'm going to sample this color here and call this Solid Background. And I'll drag that to the bottom of the layer stack, and then I think I can delete this color reference. Now I'm going to pull up the position of row 2, and I'm going to subtract 200 from it in the Y dimension so that we're starting to get our gridded pattern. I'll duplicate row 1, drag it above row 2, and I'll go ahead and subtract 400 from it. And then I'll start working my way down as well. So I'll duplicate row 2, drag it to the bottom, and I'll add 400 to that Y dimension. And I'll duplicate row 1 again and add another 400. And that fills up our screen, but I'm going to add one more of row 2 so that we can do a little scroll down. So that fills up our screen just the way we want. And if we preview it, it's starting to look pretty good. The one thing I want to do now is I want to offset these pre-comps as well so that it's not just radiating in X, but also in Y. So if row 1 here is my center layer, I'm going to go 4 frames back on the ones on either side. And then another 4 frames back for the next ones. And then another 4 frames back for that last one. So now it's sort of emanating out from a center in both X and Y. Now I'll go up to Layer, New, Null Object, and I'm going to name this null object Mover. And I'm going to parent all my rows to that null object. So then I'll pull up the position of the null, and I'll set a keyframe at frame 0. And then I'll move to, say, frame 100 or so, and I'm going to adjust its Y position by 400 pixels. So 540 minus 400. That way we get a looping point. So it looks like I need to also make a few more rows of trees. So I need to make another row 1, and I'll drag that to the bottom. And it looks like that needs to be 800. And I'll make another row 2 just in case and change its position to 1000. Yeah, looks like I needed it there for that bottom edge. So now I've got a keyframe that will bring us back to a position that looks exactly the same as the beginning if it weren't for them animating in. I can show you this by bringing this first keyframe forward, and let's see here. And if I toggle back and forth between these keyframes, you can't tell the difference. So I'll go ahead and bring this back to the beginning, and then I'm going to option click on the position stopwatch here and go to Property, Loop Out Duration. And so by doing this, it's going to repeat the null object's keyframes. And you see there, it snaps back to the center here, right as we get past that last keyframe. And that way, I don't have to keep making row after row after row. And you'll see it animates out there too. And so my goal here is to make it, when it animates out, look like it's centered too. So it's up there at the top right now. So a way I can do that now is just move this second keyframe around so that it's more in the center. And I can do that probably right around there. Yeah, that looks good. And this will create a perfect looping point. So one thing I'm noticing is when I hit my loop point here, that my trees right here snap off, and that's just because I don't have another row of trees at the very top in the beginning. So what I can do is I can grab that first row up there that's at -400, whoops, and duplicate a row 2 and put it above it, and that'll put that at -600. And then I should have a seamless loop there. Let's see. Yep. And so that did the trick for that. If you guys are having issues, that's how you can fix that. I can go ahead and offset that in time as well so that it is 4 frames behind. And that'll fix that issue. I think that wraps it up. Well, that concludes this tutorial. I hope you guys found it helpful. If you did and you'd like to see more tutorials, please go ahead and subscribe because we're making new ones all the time. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.